Hey, welcome back to the Black Girl Who Reads. This is Tonetta Clay. Like I said, welcome back to this podcast and to this episode. This is going to be the reading of chapter number 6 of the book, The Blue Castle. So, like I said, we've already had some interesting chapters already leading up to this point. I hope y'all have enjoyed those. But like I said, this is number 6, and I'm sure we're going to be getting into some meaty stuff, hopefully, right now. So, make sure that you all, of course, subscribe to the podcast, and of course this will be on YouTube as well, so subscribe to my YouTube channel as well if you want to stay abreast on this story, and of course hear future stories that I'll be reading aloud as well. So like I said, let's go ahead and get into this, y'all. The Blue Castle, chapter number 6. The ordeal was not so dreadful after all. Dr. Trent was as gruff and abrupt as usual, but he did not tell her alignment was imaginary. After he had listened to her symptoms and asked a few questions and made a quick examination, he sat for a moment looking at her quite intently. Valancy thought he looked as if he were sorry for her. She caught her breath for a moment. Was the trouble serious? Oh, it couldn't be, surely. It really hadn't bothered her much. Only lately it had gotten a little worse. Dr. Trent opened his mouth, and before he could speak, the telephone... at his elbow rang sharply. He picked up the receiver, Valancy watching him, saw his face change suddenly as he listened. Low, yes, what? Yes. A brief interval, my God. Dr. Trent dropped the receiver, dashed out of the room and upstairs without even a glance at Valancy. Oh, goodness. She heard him rushing madly about overhead, barking out a few remarks to somebody, presumably his housekeeper. Then he came tearing downstairs with a club bag in his hand, snatched his hat and coat from the rack, jerked open the street door, and rushed down the street in the direction of the station. Valancy sat alone in the little office, feeling more absolutely foolish than she had ever felt before in her life. Foolish and humiliated. So this was all that had come of her heroic determination to live up to John Foster and cast fear aside. Not only was she a failure as a relative, and non-existent as a sweetheart or friend, but she was not even any importance as a patient. I've had those feelings before too, so honestly, I'm sure y'all probably have too. So I can understand where that comes from, but it's usually just up here. Dr. Trent had forgotten her very presence in his excitement over whatever message had come by the telephone. She had gained nothing by ignoring Uncle James and flying in the face of family tradition. For a moment, she was afraid she was going to cry. It was all ridiculous. Then she heard Dr. Trent's housekeeper coming down the stairs. Valancy rose and went to the door. The doctor forgot all about me, she said with a twisted smile. Well, that's too bad, said Mrs. Peterson sympathetically. But it wasn't much wonder, poor man. That was a telegram they phoned over from the port. His son has been terribly injured in an auto accident in Montreal. Oh, goodness. The doctor had 10 minutes to catch the train. I don't know what he'll do if anything happens to Ned. He's just bound up in the boy. You'll have to come again, Miss Sterling. I hope it's nothing serious. So, something was wrong. I figured something was wrong. But like I said, sometimes we can get up in our own judgment and they forgot about me, they don't love me, they don't this, and we haven't even asked the questions or found out what happened, those kind of things yet. So this is good so far. Not saying it's good, but I mean, hopefully she'll feel better after this point. Oh, no, nothing serious, agreed Valancy. She felt a little less humiliated. It was no wonder poor Dr. Trent had forgotten her at such a moment. Nevertheless, she felt very flat and discouraged as she went down the street. Yeah, feelings like that will still come up. I understand that. Valancy went home by the shortcut of Lover's Lane. She did not often go through Lover's Lane, but it was getting near supper time, and it would never do to be late. Lover's Lane wound back of the village under great elms and maples, and deserved its name. It was hard to go there at any time and not find some canoodling couple or young girls in pairs, arms intertwined, earnestly talking over their little secrets. Valancy didn't know which made her feel more self-conscious or uncomfortable. This evening she encountered both. She met Connie Hale and Kate Bailey in the new pink organdy dresses with flowers struck coquettishly in their glossy bare hair. Valancy had never had a pink dress or worn flowers in her hair. Then she passed a young couple she didn't know, dandering along, oblivious to everything but themselves. The young man's arms was around the girl's waist, quite shamelessly. Valancy had never walked with the man's arm about her. She felt that she ought to be shocked. They might leave that sort of thing for the screening twilight, at least, but she wasn't shocked. In another flash of desperate, stark honesty, she owned to herself that she was merely envious. When she passed them, she felt quite sure they were laughing at her, pitying her. That's that queer little old maid, Valancy Sterling. They say she never had a beau in her whole life. Valancy fairly ran to get out of Lover's Lane. Never had she felt so utterly colorless and skinny and insignificant. Just where Lover's Lane debauched on the street, an old car was parked. Valancy knew that car pretty well, by sound at least, and everybody in Deerwood knew it. This was before the phrase Tin Lizzie had come into circulation, in Deerwood at least. But if it had been known, this car was the tiniest of Lizzie's, though it was not a Ford but an old gray Slauson. Nothing more battered and disreputable could be imagined. It was Barney Snaith's car, and Barney himself was just scrambling up from it, in overalls plastered with mud. Valancy gave him a swift, furtive look as she hurried by. This was the only time she had ever seen the notorious Barney Snaith, though she had heard enough about him in 5 years that he had been living up back in Muskoka. The first time had been nearly a year ago on the Muskoka Road. He had been crawling out from under his car then too, and he had given her a cheerful grin as she went by, a little whimsical grin that gave him the look of a amused gnome. He didn't look bad. She didn't believe he was bad, in spite of the wild yarns that were always told of him. Hold on, okay. Of course, he went tearing in that terrible old gray Slauson through Deerwood at hours when all decent people were in bed, often with old roaring Abel, who made the night hideous with his howls. Both of them looked dead drunk, my dear. And everyone knew that he was an escaped convict and a defaulting bank clerk and a murderer in hiding, oh my gosh, okay, and an infidel and an illegitimate son of old roaring Abel, gay, and the father of roaring Abel's illegitimate grandchild, and a counterfeit, and a forger, and a few other awful things. But still, Valancy didn't believe he was bad. Nobody was with a smile like that could be bad no matter what he'd done. Whew. I know we all heard her he say, she say, so you got to find out for yourself most times. It was that night the Prince of the Blue Castle changed from being a grim jaw and hair with a dash of premature gray to a rakish individual with overlong tawny hair, dashed with red, dark brown eyes, and ears that stuck out just enough to give him an alert look, but not enough to be called flying jibs. But he still retained something a little grim about the jaw. Barney Snaith looked even more disreputable than usual just now. It was very evident that he hadn't shaved for days, and his hands and arms, bare to his shoulders, were black with grease. But he was whistling gleefully to himself and seemed to be happy that Valancy envied him. She envied him his light-heartedness, and his irresponsibility, and his mysterious little cabin up on an island in Lake Mistawis, even his rackety old gray Slauson. Neither he nor his car had to be respectable and live up to traditions. When he rattled past her a few minutes later, bareheaded, leaning back in his Lizzie at a raffish angle, his long hair blowing in the wind, a villainous look, old black pipe in his mouth, she envied him again. Men had the best of it, no doubt about that. This outlaw was happy. Whatever he was or wasn't, she, Valancy Sterling, respectable, well-behaved to the last degree, was unhappy and always been unhappy. So there you were. Valancy was just in time for supper. The sun had clouded over and a dismal, drizzling rain was falling again. Cousin Stickles had the neuralgia Valancy had to do the family darning, and there was no time for magic wings. Can't the darning be done? Can't the darning wait till tomorrow? She pleaded. Tomorrow will bring its own duties, said Miss Frederick inexorably. Valancy darned all the evening and listened to Miss Frederick and Cousin Stickles talk about the eternal niggling gossip of the clan as they knitted drearily at interminable black stockings. They discussed second cousin Lillian's approaching wedding and all its bearings. On the whole, they approved. Second cousin Lillian was doing well for herself, though she hasn't harried, said Cousin Stickles. She must be 25. They have not, fortunately, been many old maids in our connection, said Miss Frederick bitterly. Valancy flinched. She had run the darning needle into her finger. Third cousin Aaron Gray had been scratched by a cat and had blood poisoning in his finger. Cats are the most dangerous animals, said Miss Frederick. I will never have a cat about the house. She glared significantly at Valancy through her terrible glasses. Once 5 years ago, Valancy had asked if she can have a cat. She had never referred to it since. But Miss Frederick still suspected her of harboring that unlawful desire in her heart of hearts. Let me get some water, y'all. Once Valancy sneezed, now in the Sterling Code, it was very bad. It was very bad form to sneeze in public. You can always repress a sneeze by pressing your finger on your upper lip, said Miss Frederick rebukingly. 9:30 or so, as Mr. Pepys would say, to bed. But first cousin Stickles' neuralgic back must be rubbed with Red Fern's liniment. Valancy did that. Valancy always had to do it. She hated the smell of Red Fern's liniment. I can understand that. I used to hate the smell of turpentine. I know it did very well, worked well, but my great-great-grandmother always wanted me to help her rub it on, which I didn't mind, but that smell stunk. Oh, yeah, I haven't ever smelled turpentine. I haven't seen this stuff since I was a kid, actually, but it was very good for the body, I can tell you that. But let me go ahead and get back in this. She hated the smug, beaming portly, be-whiskered, be-spectaculed picture of Dr. Red Fern on the bottle. Her fingers smelled the horrible stuff after she got into bed, in spite of all the scrubbing she gave them. Oh, sorry, y'all. Valancy's day of destiny had come and gone. She ended it as she had begun it in tears. Like I said, y'all, that's chapter 6 of the Blue Castle. So far, it's still getting good. I guess it's just kind of more laying the backdrop about, of course, Valancy and her mindset is what I'm getting from this. Her mindset about how nobody cares or loves her, or she's never going to get married. Then her family saying the same thing, and then the doctor ran out, even though he had an emergency, but he ran out, and she's feeling the same thing too. So like I said, this is definitely laying the groundwork for her mindset and the crying that she's doing as well, because she has cried several times, I think, so far. So y'all, let me know in the comments what stood out in this chapter for you. That's what stood out for me, is the mindset part. But like I said, definitely make sure that you put it in the comments, because I definitely want to hear from you as well. Either what you got out of this chapter or how you're enjoying the book so far. So again, this is Tony, the Black Girl Who Reads. Join me again for chapter number 7. It's coming soon. Peace out, y'all.